welcome to WRPB and WRPB Studios. You know, the gentleman sitting next to me, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, um, the thing that he does, I love. And when I did one, I was just telling the story about how much of a disaster it turned out to be because of not knowing. And this is why I say always use a professional. If you don't use a professional, it's going to cost you 5 times more in money and 10 times more in aggravation and frustration. With me is Brad Fontaine from Florida Custom Aquatics.
Yes.
Okay, so before you got on the air, you do, I guess, fountains, ponds, and stuff like that. I was telling a story about me doing a pond.
Right.
Okay, and I was much younger, and I had my neighbor, who was a good friend of mine, build a pond, and I bought these expensive koi in this pond. It wasn't big, and I lived up north. And what happens when the winter comes? Things freeze.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, little did I know that the fish will do fine if you just leave it alone. Well, I thought, oh my God, these poor fish won't eat. So I drill a hole, and then the rest of the pond freezes, and everything was
Right.
everything was frozen. All those koi is gone for whatever. Why'd you get into this?
So I started this. My background is actually in fisheries science and aquaculture.
Oh, cool.
So I started. I pursued an undergraduate degree at Auburn, and we did fisheries management. So I actually ended up getting hired by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission down here about 12 years ago, and I worked as a fisheries biologist for them for 12 years. But prior to that, while I was at school, I went to a leadership academy on spring break, and I met this guy, Greg Whitstock. He's the owner of Aquascape, and they're the manufacturer of all the products that we use. There's only a handful of pond product companies out there,
Right.
and Aquascape is definitely top of the line. And I just happened to run into him and meet him, and he told me about what they do, and I thought it was really, really interesting. So I kind of kept that in my back pocket for a while. And when I started working for the state, I decided to start doing this as a side business. That was 12 years ago.
Okay, so you already had a background in the management of stuff like this anyway, right?
Yes, yeah, the ecological processes and how the environment works together. And the thing about these systems is that they're basically a small contained ecosystem.
Right.
And so it does help to have that knowledge and that background for sure.
And obviously we don't have freeze over here, but if you do, don't drill a hole because it'll freeze further down.
Right, yeah, we do not have that problem, luckily.
Right. But we have other problems here.
Sure, for sure.
Okay, and you don't do just, like I had a small pond, so you do ponds, lakes.
Yes, yeah, we actually offer all kinds of aquatic services. So we do natural water features, waterfalls, pondless waterfalls, fountains, lake management, that's vegetation control, aeration systems, that's fish stocking. We even, for larger lakes, offer electrofishing services.
What's that?
So that's basically, it's similar to what I used to do for the State Fish and Wildlife Commission, but it's essentially you electrocute the water. You have a controlled output. You shock the water, and you see the fish that come up. You count them, weigh them, measure them, and it just helps us manage for what the customer's looking for. So we've done it a couple times in Vero, and for these larger lakes, and they wanted to produce trophy-sized largemouth bass. So we came up with a management plan, and they've been following that, and they get their large fish, and that's their goal. So everyone has a different kind of end game in mind, so we have to keep that in mind.
So you electrocute the fish.
It only stuns them temporarily, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm like, this sounds a little weird.
It does sound weird, yeah.
So when I'm driving and I pass an office building with this big retention pond or whatever in front, and it's got a little fountain.
Correct.
That's what you do.
We'll do the installation of those fountains. We do maintenance. The aeration systems is where the bubbles come up from the bottom. That's probably the most healthy thing you can do ecologically for the pond. And then a lot of times you'll see like cattails or completely overgrown vegetation. We take care of that as well.
Okay, so you're the guy that I see taking these little dinky boats into the middle of these ponds. Okay.
Yes.
So since you're doing management and stuff, the question that everybody is going to think of is, do you have a problem with alligators?
I don't. No, I've been here. I'm not from Florida originally, but I've been here since 2011, and you know, in my old job, we were encountering alligators every day on the St. Johns River. We worked a lot. They're just all over the place. I'm pretty used to them, so they don't bother me.
Okay, so like on these ponds and stuff that you work on, do they end up in these ponds and lakes?
They can. Most of the time, you know, they're smaller. FWC actually has programs to remove like larger nuisance alligators, but for the most part, we see them here and there, but they're pretty small, and you know, it's just something that we don't really think about. We don't even worry about. They keep to themselves. They're afraid of us, even the big ones. Where you run into problems is if people have been feeding them, and that's FWC definitely preaches. Don't feed the wildlife. Don't feed the alligators because they get used to humans,
Right.
and then they start thinking, you know, you're going to give them food, and then when you don't, they get mad. So.
Okay, so what are some things that you specialize, not that you specialize in, but some specialty items that you've done over the years?
I think the thing that I prefer the most, I love to do the most, is building waterfalls. It's like an art form. I've never been good at drawing pencil and paper or
Right.
art, paint, anything like that. But you know, when I get a palette of rocks and we get to put together a waterfall, that is my creative outlet. And you know, the end product looks amazing, and you know, customers get to enjoy that. They get to hear the sound of running water. There's a lot of health benefits to that. So it's really just, that's my biggest thing. The biggest thing that we do is build custom koi ponds and water features.
So a waterfall or a fountain in a pond is probably healthy for the ecosystem.
It definitely is. Yeah, it exposes it to air. It mixes the oxygen in with the water, and that dissolved oxygen that now is in the water is beneficial for the fish and all the organisms that live in there.
All right, so how do we keep the algae away?
Algae is a very simple equation. It's nutrients and sunlight. So if you've got phosphorus and nitrogen coming into the pond, you want to try to do your best to eliminate that. And then the sunlight, we can't really do much with that.
No.
You can do some shade, things of that nature, but for the most part, we can't control the sun. So we can try to control the input, the nutrients that are going into the pond, and we can also try to mitigate where those nutrients go. So if there's nothing in the pond, then it's likely to produce algae. But if we can put some beneficial plants in there, some stuff that's not really invasive, that doesn't spread like wildfire, then those nutrients will then go towards the production of those plants versus going into algae.
So when you put, for lack of a better, livestock in a pond, will that help control the algae too?
So the livestock will also produce nutrients. However, there's certain types of fish that are known for eating algae.
Right.
There's the triploid grass carp that you have to get a permit from FWC to stock. They don't actually eat algae, but they eat a lot of the submersed plants, the hydrilla, the chara, stuff that kind of grows up from the bottom and tops out. So those are a really good one. And we have tons of blue tilapia here, and they will eat things like duckweed, and they'll eat some algae as well. So they're a non-native fish, so we don't recommend stocking them, but they're pretty much in every natural system around here.
What's interesting is you're not just the guy who builds this stuff. You know the background about the systems within the water and within the fish, or
right.
what you put in there.
Yeah, I don't know, it just made sense.
But yeah, there's a definite synergy in what you learned and what you do.
Sure.
And I get it, though, because for me here, when somebody comes on and, you know, gets time and does their own interviews, and I train them along on how to interview and stuff, it's like I look at it so proud.
Yeah.
So when you build something, you got to look at it.
It's the best feeling when you turn a waterfall on for the first time. You plug the pump in, and you see all the water spilling over the rocks for the first time. Usually try to get the customer out there, and they see it too. It's just it's a really great feeling.
Okay, so the big question is, do you have one in your house?
I have two.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I have a pond in the back. It's probably like a 12-foot stream. It's got a bridge that crosses over it, and that dumps into a pond that's like probably 10 by 15. And then on the front yard, there's a pondless waterfall in the entryway. So as you're walking in, you see a 12 linear feet of waterfall, like a stream basically.
Okay, and where does that? So it just gets refed back.
Yeah, there's an underground basin. We use some products called Aqua Blocks. It's basically like a large storage tank underground, and there's a pump down there, so it just recirculates. So you're not adding water constantly. You're not using a lot of the resources to keep these things running.
Okay, let's go back to your backyard pond.
Okay.
Does it have livestock in it?
It does. Yeah, we've got water lilies. We've got all kinds of plants. I think I have probably about a dozen goldfish,
Okay.
and probably 4 koi right now.
Okay. I think that's so calming.
I sit out there all the time in
See?
the evening. Yeah, just after work, and just take a deep breath and listen to it and watch the fish, feed the fish. It's very relaxing.
I think that what most people don't understand is that moving water is very calming.
It is. There's actually proven, scientific health benefits to moving water. Negative ions get released into the atmosphere, and that helps improve your mood and everything.
So, the next question I have is kind of interesting, and this is on the technical end. You build a pond.
Hmm.
You don't put anything in it, but all of a sudden there's little fish and stuff in it.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
It's crazy. If you dig a hole out here in Florida, there's going to be fish in it eventually. It's just birds will kind of go from pond to pond.
okay.
They get eggs on their feet. They'll pick up a
that makes
fish.
sense.
They'll drop it on accident. There's a lot of different ways that fish can just show up.
Obviously, there's no law against littering for fish.
Right, and flooding too. If there's any connectivity to anything, during a flood, fish have the opportunity to get in places,
Okay,
and they do.
so a lot of times I ask, did you get family support when you started this? But you already were in it.
So yeah, my family's always been supportive of what I do, but I had a full-time job working for the state. So I started this business from scratch, just kind of an idea and a thought, and meeting Craig Whitstock, the owner of Aquascape. So that really was I used it as a way to try to grow the business and provide some extra income, but it's also just something I really, really like to do. It was like a kind of a hobby that turned into a really fun career.
Well, so you've learned that being an entrepreneur, you have to be a little crazy.
You did have to be a little crazy,
Okay.
yeah.
You really have to be a little crazy. And the ironic thing is, you doing some major projects,
Hmm.
which is one thing, but on the smaller projects that you do for these residential homes per se, do people take care of it the way you teach them? Because people don't really listen really well.
It's hit or miss. I mean, for the most part, they do, and we try to preach. Our systems are kind of self-sustaining. We try to work with Mother Nature versus against it. You'll see a lot of times koi ponds that are designed in different ways. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but they have all these big external filters. We don't use any of that. We use biological filtration. Like I said, the motto is to work with Mother Nature, not against it.
Right, and that would make sense because it's worked for a gazillion years. Mother Nature has made it work.
Right, and
Okay.
there's opportunities too. So if people don't want to, or don't have time, or don't feel like doing any of the maintenance, we do offer monthly maintenance services as well.
Okay, so we got a top of time. How do people find you? You have a website?
Yeah, flcustomaquatic.com.
Okay.
We're all over. We're on. I post the most on Facebook out of all the social media.
Right.
We're starting up a YouTube, so we should have some more videos coming out on that. But yeah, Florida Custom Aquatic Services
Do you have
on
a phone
Facebook.
number? Do you know it?
Yeah.
So many people
Cool.
don't know it.
I do. It's
Okay.
321-285-6612.
Everybody, having a pond is like so cool, and I think I had one. I learned a lesson from it, but every time I go somewhere and there's a pond there and there's fish, you'll always find people admiring that pond. And when you drive and you see waterfalls in front of these places, they don't. And I'm sure we're not going to talk about money, but I'm sure it's pricey to do stuff. Okay.
It definitely can be. Rock is really expensive here because there's not a lot of natural rock in Florida, not that we typically use. So everything has to come in. We get it from Tennessee. So the freight charge for moving 50,000 pounds of rock is pretty high.
So even when we're driving, sometimes we stop to admire some of the work that's done in fountains in front of buildings and stuff. And I don't know that you understand that digging a hole, having water in it, is just a small piece of keeping it running and running properly.
Absolutely.
So what's your website again?
flcustomaquatic.com.
And your phone number?
321-285-6612.
Brad, thank you for coming on.
All right, absolutely. Thank you. It's been great.
Everybody, check them out. Use a professional. I don't have to tell you again. I've told you a million times. We'll be right back.
All right.